Welcome to what I hope will be a cozy exploration for you today. We're about to take a journey way back in time, really, to understand the long and, frankly, quite astonishing history underpinning the situation in Israel and Palestine. We're going to try and set aside the daily headlines for just a moment and, dig deep into the ancient roots of this enduring and often heartbreaking conflict. This history stretches back millennia. We're talking all the way to the 17th century BC, with the arrival of the Jewish patriarchs in Canaan. Now, this region, it encompasses what we know today as Israel, the West Bank, Gaza, and even parts of some neighboring countries. It's a land holding immense significance for, well, a multitude of peoples over thousands of years, known by many names.
Right. And if we start unpacking this early period, you see the rise and fall of these ancient kingdoms. There's the Israelite monarchy, starting with King Saul, then King David, who famously established Jerusalem as his capital, and King Solomon, who built the first temple there. These early figures, these events, they really laid a foundational layer, but it's important to remember this unified kingdom, it didn't last forever. It eventually split around 930 BC or so.
Split. How so?
Well, the northern part became the Kingdom of Israel, and the southern part was known as the Kingdom of Judah. And this division, it really played a significant role in shaping the history that followed, the identities of the people there.
It's fascinating, isn't it? It's thinking about how the demographics of this land shifted over time.
Yeah.
It wasn't always, predominantly Jewish, was it?
Not at all. You had numerous conquests by various empires, leading to really significant changes. Think about the Assyrian conquest of Israel in the 8th century BC, and then the Babylonian conquest of Judah in the 6th century BC. That's when the first temple was destroyed, many Judeans exiled. Major turning points.
Right, major turning points. And how did those events, the conquest, the exiles, how did they impact the long-term connection of the Jewish people to this specific land?
Well, they were incredibly traumatic, obviously, but they also, in a way, solidified this diasporic identity, this longing for return. It became really central to Jewish belief and practice. Then much later, you have the Roman Empire's conquest in the 1st century AD and the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD, another huge cataclysm.
And the Romans actually renamed the area, didn't they?
They did. Their decision to rename Judah as Palestine, that came after the Bar Kokhba revolt in the 2nd century AD. It seems like it was quite a deliberate move.
Well, what was the thinking behind that renaming?
Well, the consensus is that the Roman intention was pretty clear, to try and sever those historical, those emotional ties of the Jewish people to the land after these repeated uprisings.
An attempt to just erase that connection from the map, literally and, well, symbolically too.
Exactly. But as you said, history and memory, they're not so easily erased, are they?
No, definitely not. And as the centuries rolled by, Christianity started to rise within the Roman Empire, eventually becoming dominant. But that didn't mean the land became exclusively Christian, right?
Not at all. The 7th century brought another huge transformation, the Arab conquest and the spread of Islam. And this period saw the construction of the Dome of the Rock, right there on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, a site already incredibly holy in Judaism.
So that act, building the dome there, it cemented Jerusalem's importance for Muslims too.
Absolutely. It made Jerusalem a holy city, not just for Jews and Christians, but also for Muslims. So by this time, you've got 3 major monotheistic religions with these profound, deeply interwoven connections to this one single contested piece of land.
Wow. And that convergence, those overlapping religious claims, how did that further complicate things for the future?
Well, it seems almost inevitable looking back that it would lead to further conflict,
Like the Crusades?
Exactly. The Crusades, starting in the late 11th century, launched by European Christians aiming to regain control of Jerusalem from the Seljuk Turks, who were ruling at the time.
And these campaigns had far-reaching consequences, didn't they? Not just for Christians and Muslims.
That's right. While the main goal was Christian control over the holy sites, the Jewish communities living there also suffered greatly during these conflicts. They were often caught in the middle, subjected to violence, persecution.
It really highlights the vulnerability, doesn't it, of minority groups during these big upheavals.
It does. Okay, let's fast forward a few centuries. From the 16th century right up until World War I, you have the Ottoman Empire, a major Islamic power controlling this whole territory. It was often sort of unofficially called Palestine during this time.
Okay, the Ottoman period. But during this time, wasn't there a major ideological shift happening back in Europe that would eventually circle back and have huge repercussions here?
Yes, absolutely. This is when you see the rise of Zionism in Europe.
Zionism. Could you unpack that a bit? What was driving it?
Sure. Zionism was, at its core, a response to centuries of anti-Semitism and persecution faced by Jews in Europe. It was this growing belief that Jews were a nation and deserved their own state, self-determination, specifically in their ancestral homeland.
So it wasn't just one single idea.
No, it was quite diverse, actually. You had socialist Zionists, religious Zionists, political Zionists, but the common thread was this return to the historical homeland. And this idea gained traction, especially in the late 19th, early 20th centuries.
Leading to more immigration.
Exactly. Increasing numbers of Jews began immigrating back to the region, which inevitably led to growing tensions with the Arab population already living there, who also saw Palestine as their homeland.
Then comes World War I, a total game changer for the Middle East. The Ottoman Empire collapses.
Right, and the victorious powers, Britain and France, basically carve up the region between them.
And Britain gets control over the area they called the British Mandate for Palestine. This seems critical.
It really is. The Mandate was this legal framework set up by the League of Nations. But the crucial thing was the Balfour Declaration, issued by the British back in 1917.
The Balfour Declaration. What did it actually say?
It was a public statement expressing British support for the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people.
A national home. That sounds potentially vague.
Extremely vague. And crucially, it was also quite ambiguous about the rights and aspirations of the existing Arab population, who were, the vast majority at the time.
So that ambiguity just became a recipe for conflict.
Pretty much. Both sides interpreted it in ways that supported their own national goals, and it became a major source of contention right from the start.
Okay, so moving into the 1930s, Jewish immigration increases dramatically. Why then specifically?
Well, the horrific persecution of Jews in Nazi Germany, it created this desperate need for refuge.
Understandably. And that influx must have increased tensions even more.
Definitely. Increased tensions, increased violence between Jewish and Arab communities. And the British, caught in the middle as the Mandate Authority, found themselves in an increasingly impossible situation.
What did they do?
They tried to manage it by imposing restrictions on Jewish immigration, partly to appease the growing Arab unrest. But this period also saw the formation of more organized Jewish self-defense groups, militias.
And then the Holocaust during World War II.
The Holocaust just intensified everything. For survivors and their supporters, the need for a Jewish homeland felt more urgent than ever. Post-war migration to Palestine increased again, fueling the conflict further.
So Britain, basically facing an unsolvable problem, decided to pull out.
Essentially, yes. They hand the problem over to the newly formed United Nations.
And the UN comes up with the 1947 Partition Plan.
Right. The plan proposed dividing Palestine into two states, one Jewish, one Arab, with Jerusalem designated as an international zone under UN control.
How'd that plan received?
Not at all. The plan allocated about 56% of the territory to the proposed Jewish state. This was despite the fact that Jews owned only a small fraction of the land and made up maybe a third of the population.
So the Arab leadership?
They rejected it outright. They saw it as deeply unjust, a violation of the rights of the Arab majority.
And the Jewish leadership?
They weren't entirely happy with the borders, but they accepted the plan. They saw it as a vital step towards achieving statehood.
Okay, so the plan is proposed, rejected by one side, accepted by the other. What happens when the British actually leave in May 1948?
The moment the British Mandate ended, Israel declared its independence.
And that declaration immediately triggers war.
Immediately. Neighboring Arab nations, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq intervened, launching the first Arab-Israeli war.
What was the outcome of that 1948 war?
Israel emerged victorious, controlling significantly more territory than the UN plan had allocated, including West Jerusalem. Jordan took control of the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and Egypt took the Gaza Strip.
But the human cost?
Immense. The war led to the displacement of over 750,000 Palestinians from their homes in the territory that became Israel, an event Palestinians call al-Nakba, the catastrophe. It created this huge, enduring refugee crisis that's still unresolved today.
So the conflict didn't end there. The decades that followed saw more wars, shifting borders. The 1967 Six-Day War seems like another massive turning point.
Absolutely massive. It was a very brief war, just 6 days, but incredibly decisive.
What were the results on the ground?
Israel won a swift victory, capturing the Golan Heights from Syria, the West Bank and East Jerusalem from Jordan, and the Gaza Strip and the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt.
Sinai was later returned, wasn't it?
Yes, Sinai was returned to Egypt as part of the Camp David Peace Treaty in 1979. But the other territories, Golan, West Bank, East Jerusalem, Gaza, remained under Israeli occupation and are still highly contested.
And the war also affected the Palestinians again.
Yes, many more Palestinians were displaced, becoming refugees, and most were unable to return. The occupation of the West Bank and Gaza brought millions of Palestinians under direct Israeli military rule.
And this is when we start seeing the growth of Israeli settlements in those occupied territories.
Exactly. The establishment and expansion of Israeli settlements in the West Bank and Gaza began becoming a major source of ongoing friction and a key issue in the conflict.
Fueling Palestinian resistance.
It certainly fueled resistance movements, including the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, which became the main representative body for Palestinians. This period also saw more regional conflicts like Israel's invasion of Lebanon in 1982.
The settlements were and are a huge point of contention, right?
A huge point. Seen by Palestinians and most of the international community as illegal under international law and a major barrier to creating a viable Palestinian state side by side with Israel.
Okay, then in 1987, the first Intifada kicks off. What was that?
The Intifada, meaning shaking off in Arabic, was largely a grassroots Palestinian uprising against the occupation. It started spontaneously, fueled by decades of frustration, lack of political progress, and the daily realities of military rule. It involved demonstrations, strikes, civil disobedience, but also stone throwing and eventually more violent confrontations.
And what impact did the Intifada have?
It really brought the Palestinian issue back to the forefront of international attention, and many argue it ultimately pushed both sides and the international community towards seeking a political solution, leading eventually to the Oslo Accords in the 1990s.
The Oslo Accords. That sounded hopeful at the time.
It did. It was a framework agreement aiming for interim Palestinian self-government in parts of the West Bank and Gaza, with the idea of negotiating final status issues like borders, Jerusalem, refugees, settlements down the line.
But that lasting peace didn't materialize. Why did Oslo ultimately fail to deliver?
Well, deep disagreements remained on all those core issues. Jerusalem's status, the right of return for Palestinian refugees, the continued expansion of Israeli settlements. These proved insurmountable at the time.
And this leads to the Second Intifada.
Yes, in 2000, it was triggered controversially by a visit from Ariel Sharon, then an Israeli opposition leader, to the Temple Mount Haram al-Sharif site in Jerusalem, a place incredibly sensitive for both Muslims and Jews.
And the Second Intifada was different from the first.
Much more violent, sadly.
Yeah.
Marked by suicide bombings carried out by Palestinian militant groups against Israeli civilians, and heavy Israeli military responses, incursions into Palestinian areas, and a severe breakdown of trust and the peace process.
Israel later withdrew from Gaza, right, in 2005.
Unilaterally, yes. Israel dismantled its settlements in Gaza and withdrew its forces. However, it maintained control over Gaza's borders, airspace, and coastline.
And then Hamas took control of Gaza.
In 2007, yes, after internal Palestinian conflict with Fatah, the party controlling the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. This split created a whole new set of challenges. Hamas, designated a terrorist organization by many countries, doesn't recognize Israel's right to exist.
Leading to the blockade and repeated wars in Gaza.
Exactly. Israel, along with Egypt, imposed a strict blockade on Gaza, citing security concerns, particularly rocket fire from Hamas. And there have been several devastating wars between Israel and Hamas in Gaza since then. Operations Cast Lead, Pillar of Defense, Protective Edge, among others.
And even more recently, things remain volatile. The U.S. moving its embassy to Jerusalem in 2018, renewed conflict in East Jerusalem and Gaza in 2021. It feels like a cycle.
It underscores the deep-seated, unresolved nature of this long historical struggle. Even when ceasefires are brokered, the underlying issues remain. So as we've sort of traced, the history here is just incredibly complex. It's this tapestry woven with threads of ancient kingdoms, profound religious significance for multiple faiths, imperial conquests, competing nationalist movements, and these recurring tragic cycles of conflict and displacement.
Yeah, the competing claims to the very same land, rooted so deeply in historical narratives, religious beliefs, it's created an enduring and unbelievably challenging situation.
It really has.
What becomes so clear listening to this history is that the conflict you see today isn't just some modern political spat. It is profoundly shaped by millennia of history, by how different groups remember and interpret that past, and by the enduring legacy of displacement, the competing dreams of sovereignty, all focused on this tiny but incredibly significant part of the world.
Absolutely. And understanding this deep historical context is just crucial, I think, for making any sense of the complexities of the current situation. It really invites us and invites you listening to consider how these historical events, how they're remembered and interpreted, continue to influence the perspectives, the fears, the actions of everyone involved. The weight of the past really does shape the present and the possibilities for any future peace.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What long-held assumptions might a deeper dive into this history challenge for you? Something to think about.